with the master distiller, Paula McIntyre. You've been here quite a few years now.
I'm here near over 20 years now, Paula.
20 years, right?
Yeah,
right.
Love it.
So we're talking about Northern Ireland's 100 years old. So we're just looking at some of the products in the borough, and of course this one of our iconic products, the distillery and the whisky. So in 1921, what would picture the scene here
I think it would have been a little bit different than it is today.
I don't think this beautiful room would have been here.
But unbelievably, I think the taste of the whisky would have been actually very similar. Yeah. So we've been bottled from 1882, and the whisky even then was very similar to what we're making today.
But it's the same ingredients, essentially, isn't it?
So really it's just the water, and that's one of the reasons that the distillery was sited all those hundreds of years ago. Here was the water source.
Yes.
And we just get then barley that we allow it to sprout, and then we dry it. So the ingredients haven't changed, so really the taste shouldn't change.
And you don't dry it with peat. It's more of a, you dry it without that taste.
Yeah,
it's quite air.
So a lot of Scotch whiskies like that smoky peatiness, and they use that smoke from the peat to dry their barley. Where here you'll see those unusual pagoda towers.
Yes, of course, yes.
So in the old days, 100 years ago, they would have been using those towers to dry the barley, but they were just drawing in air, warm the air, and use the hot air to dry the barley.
Yeah.
So to give you that
pure taste.
Well, just no smoky peatiness. It's kind of like a nice fruity spiciness to the whisky itself.
So what would have been happening here in 1921?
Yeah, well, I suppose our biggest market way back then was the US. And in 1919, this whole movement started, I suppose. And it was really, a lot of the states weren't allowed to sell whisky and to sell alcohol indeed. And I suppose that really lasted between 1919 and all the way up to 1933.
Yeah.
But in those days, around 100 years ago, there would have been a lot of, I suppose, opportunity seen to say, no, it's going to open up quite shortly. So we actually have some of our records here where we rented an extra acre, 3 roods and 31 perches.
Right, never heard of that one.
Look up what the hell they are. So just short of 2 acres from the McNaughton estate. Right. So obviously in anticipation of the needed more land to build more
to store whiskey.
And more to store whiskey,
That must have been, you'd have got a good lot of whiskey
in 2
packed
acres.
into 2 acres.
Oh yeah, huge. So the optimism must have been really good.
Yeah,
but
realism.
But prohibition really, as I say, went on for a little while longer. But you'll see then, we had our own steamship, believe it or not, way back then. And again, in the early 30s then, we were getting ready for prohibition to finish. And then almost one of the first people from Europe to send whiskey over was Bushmills Distillery in our own SS Bushmills steamship.
I bet you they were glad to see that coming.
I think there was flags and everyone out cheering and hollering. I think it landed in New York. Welcome with open arms.
Brilliant. What would the scene have been like here in 1921, Mark, as regard fishing? We were looking at fishing and...
Well, he's called it Dunservic, and that's what most people would call it today. In those days, it was a fishing industry, and the men would have called it the March Foot.
Right.
The harbour that we see today is totally different from what it would have been in those days. There wouldn't have been as much cement construction around the place. The boats would have been pulled up and down on the single paths to get them out of the water at the end of a day's fishing. And fishing really was nearly a complete 12 months of the year industry.
Yeah.
So the only real months that you were quiet was January and February, but that gave you time to mend nets, repair boats, make new creels and lobster pots. So there was always something to do, because the start of the season you were fishing for bait.
Yes.
What they call bait, Paula, we call langoustines today.
Oh, imagine.
That was the bait for your long lines, because then you went out at the start of the season for cod and haddock and whiting. As the season progressed, you were after mackerel and herring. You trawled for the flatfish around White Park Bay. You fished for salmon right out towards Donegal. So it was a continual cycle. And the men here had to have a great knowledge, not only of the ocean, but of the weather and the climate.
Of course.
And that was all passed on orally. But these were families like the McMullins and the Wilkinsons, the McClennels, the Galts and the Mackays. Dominated this industry here, and these men really knew the ocean, And they had a very simple way of life, which I really admire. Sometimes we could be more simplistic in our way of life. Everything was about continuity, keeping alive traditions. There was very little in the way of outside influences because they didn't have a television. Very few houses even had a wireless. Most of them didn't even bother with the newspaper. That was a luxury. So the language remained the same, the accents and the colonialisms remained the same. Their way of life, if they weren't at the sea, they were toiling the land because you had to be very self-sustained. So their diet was amazingly good.
I can imagine.
They were growing their own vegetables, growing their own potatoes. There was ducks and chickens on most of the little houses. And if you add on to that fresh fish every single day.
That's like a Mediterranean diet that they talk about.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. And the men here, despite their real hardships, lived like into their 80s and 90s regularly, big long lives. And that was because of their diet and the amount of physical exercise that they did every single day.
Adrian, tell me about John, because he was a potato pioneer, wasn't he? He was a real...
Yeah, John definitely was way ahead of his time on potato breeding, and had a lot of sort of men from all over the world came to advise or to get advice from John Clark on breeding the potatoes.
So he left school when he was 15, and yet he ended up advising professors at Cambridge on the nuances of growing spuds. He
was advising, and these men came from Cambridge and all these places to Innisfree and to his Allerbrook almond farm to see and to see potatoes.
And what was it that made John so special?
John was special because at that time very few other people were doing breeding, and John had done it on a shoestring, whereas today it took £3 million to breed one variety of potatoes.
Really?
Whereas John was doing it in a few pounds.
Honestly, so a few pounds, so he was like, and now it's a big science. And
yeah, and it can take up to 15 years to breed that one variety, and you've so many different variants in those 15 years deciding whether it's going to be good quality eating or disease free and all these things like that.
But he came up with different varieties, didn't he? I mean, he came up with
33 different varieties over his lifetime.
And what were the names of those?
Most of those names all had Ulster prefix.
Yes.
Now I don't remember them all, but they're
all. I don't expect you to either.
But they all started with Ulster. Ulster Sceptre as an example is one,
And that was sort of is it true that one of those spuds was like sort of the grandfather of the Morris Piper?
Yeah, Morris Piper and Navan, both two local varieties today, were both, I think, they're grandparents of the Ulster. So the Ulster's grandparents of those two varieties.
So the Morris Piper is the most popular spud in the world, really. And if it hadn't been for John Clark doing his work on a shoestring, that wouldn't have come about.
That probably never would have came about, no.
And what would the farm have been like in 1921? What would have been the machinery used, or the crops?
Well, obviously the machinery's unbelievable. It changed from 100 years now that there've been still horses and ploughs. Probably we found a document saying there was nearly 10 or 12 families living on the farm.
Really?
And now there's one ourselves.
And that would have sustained 10 or 12 families?
They would have been all working on the farms. So that would be probably the biggest change. There's very little staff compared to.
And is it because of machination that you're really...
Yeah, we have machines now that'll do the work of 10 people in a few hours. But that's not as much fun, and there's more payments in the machinery.
Exactly. So the machines got rid of the families that were living here, really.
Basically, and people didn't want to work in the farms. They didn't want to get dirty and lift potatoes or by hand in a basket. Now it's all machines.
Yeah, and I used your wheat in one of the recipes. I made a bread with it, so you'd give me wheat, and then I ground it up. I mean, is that something that you've been doing here for a while?
Yeah, we've been trying it for a long time to try and... Our problem is the sunshine increases the protein in the wheat.
Right.
And turn as your bacon qualities for the proteins. So we struggle up here in the north, but we have...
So you need the sunshine?
You need the sunshine for the proteins.
Well. Today would have been a good day for it. And then carrots as well, that's something that you're...
Yeah, we just started the carrots a few years. Our ground's a wee bit heavy for carrots, so we rent sandier ground. There's plenty of sandy ground in McGilligan, and up around Limavady there's a sandy bit. So
and that's good for, so you don't get novelty carrots, isn't it?
Yeah, they do great carrots.
But they're brilliant carrots, aren't they? I mean, I've been cooking with your carrots and I've been cooking with Gilligan carrots for years, and I would say, but sure, a carrot's a carrot.
No,
it's
with a lot of
definitely
people
not.
coming saying, and a lot of the carrots are imported.
Yeah.
You know, they've been dug maybe a week ago, and they're never as fresh as what we can pull out of the ground.
No, and also it's just, you know, you get that lovely sweetness, I think, from the carrots around here. What way is that now?
Maybe the more sandy soils, and we've never short of rainfall would be one of the big things. That we're getting steady rainfall on the sandy ground would help the quality of the carrot.
Yeah.
Anyway, they came over to Port Stewart, and they made the best of it. They paid back the shop, and that's how things started here in Port Stewart.
And you're still going?
And we're still going, yeah.
Yeah, and you're
I mean, I'm the fourth, I'm the third generation, and Damien is the fourth generation. Yeah. Hopefully, some other member of the family will continue the business on.
Yeah, and they'll be sitting here and what?
100 years.
And 100 years, yeah. And you'll still be making ice cream to the same family recipe.
Ice cream is a lovely business to be in, you know. And
it's memory making business, isn't it?
Yeah, well, you just, you know, you can see the children when they come in to buy a cone and a big smile on their face walking out, you know. Yeah, it's a very pleasant job.
That doesn't change.
I had the chance to go into amusement business while I was here. And I tried it for a little while, but I didn't like it.
No.
I could have made a lot more money, much easier than catering.
But you wouldn't have been as happy, Nino.
I wouldn't have been as happy.
No, definitely not.
But I'm very fortunate to, have a nice clientele and to be respected in the town.
And the thing about it is, like, Morelli's is synonymous with here, isn't it? I mean, you go to Morelli's for a poke. That's
well, I know that people come all the way from Belfast,
of course they do.
Places far afield, especially at weekends, you know, to have a Sunday here in Port Stewart. Especially since my father opened the Sunday Garden.
Yes.
He expanded quite quickly, you know, and he moved in this direction, he moved in the other direction as well. So it became the place to go to in summer.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, now everybody seems to think the same thing.
Everybody's opening up a coffee shop.
Yeah, so
but they're not Morelli's, Nino.
They're
not Morelli's.
Yeah, they're nicknamed Port Stewart Latte Town.
I know, but sure. No.
We just have to.
Yours is the best, Nino.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Well, look, thank you very much for giving this snapshot of your family business.
Yeah. Port Stewart has always been my favourite spot.
That's beautiful.
Even though I come from a beautiful valley in Italy.
You do.
You probably know because you've been there.
I know, but it's...
Port Stewart.
You've got the best of both worlds, Nino.
Yes, I have.
Beautiful
I mean, I wake up in the morning and I look at that continuously changing panorama.
Exactly.
I'm in Italy, I'm faced with the wonderful mountain scenery.
I know.
Which I love too, you know. So I'm very fortunate that way.
You're blessed.
I'm very lucky to have a good family who are quite happy to work for their living and enjoy it as they're doing so.
Very good. You couldn't ask for more, could you?
No.
Thanks, Nino.
Thanks, Paula.
Thank you. Right, we're in the factory now, the powerhouse of Morelli's. So we've got Naldo, Daniela, Tanya. So again, third generation or fourth generation?
Fourth generation.
Fourth generation, yeah. So tell us, and it was your dad, Guido, really, that was the man behind all the flavours of the ice cream, wasn't he?
He was. Dad, we used to call Dad the Tinker Man. Dad was very passionate about making ice cream, and I think he always strove for excellence. So he would have always wanted to improve our ice cream, and was always working on recipes and looking for the next big thing.
And you've taken that mantle up now, haven't you? That you with the ice cream and the...
Yeah, but Dad had probably more time than me to look at recipes and stuff. But I enjoy that side of the business, and the awards every year, the Ice Cream Alliance Awards, Great Taste Awards, the Blaz Awards are always there, and we want to do as best as we can.
And you've got the Golden Fork this year, which is mega.
We did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that must have been amazing, because I know you were over with it as well, over at it, Daniela, and that was like, this is like the sort of like an Oscar, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it was very fancy. It was great to be there to experience it and see all the style of the way they put the show on. That was really good.
I know it's over in London.
It was in Harrogate this year.
Of course, Harrogate,
but normally it is in London.
Yeah, and that was for your caramelised hazelnut.
Yeah, it was for caramelised hazelnut flavour. So.
So with Garva WA, so you can't do a film about food in the borough without mentioning the WA, of course. So it's Dan Garva was the first WA in Northern Ireland. Yes.
Yes.
And Helen Livingstone, you were actually head of the Federation of Women's Institute in Northern Ireland, weren't you? What year was that?
1985 to 1988. I was chairman for Northern Ireland.
And how long have you been in the WA for?
Since 1972.
1972.
We came here to Garva. The best way to make friends is join the WA.
And get a good tea.
And get a good tea, exactly.
I mean, that's the thing about the WA, because I've done probably thousands of demos in WA halls over this past few years, and you always get a good supper. And everybody's quite competitive, I think, because it was, there's a bit of, I mean, I've never had a bad WA supper. I don't think it exists, does it?
It's coming a wee bit more normal now. We're not just, we don't
this
go
doesn't
into
look
the cream
normal.
cakes. Oh, but this is special for you.
Oh, is it all right?
But I think more and more people are getting interested in baking. Just look at the British Bake Off, things like that. You're going to see a lot of people, like in lockdown, a lot of people were into baking. So and the WI is about crafts and fellowship and keeping those traditions alive.
But this
is
I think this is what, this is like, because I think it's nice to sit around a table with your friends, and I think that's as important as what's on the table, really, isn't it?
That's true. A wee bit of crack.
Yeah, because but like if you're looking back at 1921 and around that era, there would have been very much, you would have had this kind of thing. I know it would have been a special occasion, but food was you had the kitchen table, and you had the food, and there's that whole thing now. A lot of kids don't even know how to use a table, and I think that's they don't know when they put their food in the lap, and it's like, so it's lovely to see that. And you still do this in WA, do you? You still have your
on occasion, for special occasions, we do.
Not every night, so you don't have it every night. Now the supper, every other supper. Yes.
But a high tea, I mean, lots of people spend a fortune having an afternoon tea in a posh hotel somewhere, but we can do it ourselves. The talent is here.
This is like, this to me is like what you would get in a posh hotel, isn't it? But it's all homemade,